nobody that's successful has ever done it on their own.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined, the podcast that explores the twists, turns, and transformations that make up our veterinary journeys. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Sprinkle, and today's conversation might just change how you approach your biggest anxiety-inducing challenges. Why do some veterinarians struggle with high-stakes exams like the NAVLE, even on their second or third attempt, despite knowing the material inside and out? Why does the fight or flight response make even the most brilliant minds go blank at critical moments? Our guest today brings a fascinating inside-outsider perspective to these questions. Ryan Smith is one of the veterinary profession's most impactful mental performance coaches. After years of training high-achieving executives and elite athletes to perform under pressure, Ryan now applies these same techniques to help veterinary professionals overcome their biggest mental hurdles, from test anxiety to practice transitions. In this episode, you'll discover why your body's threat response might be sabotaging your performance, the surprising statistic about NAVLE pass rates for retakers, it is not what you'd expect, how to build your personal 5 types of people support network for professional growth, and practical strategies to manage major career transitions like selling your practice. If Ryan's name sounds familiar, his partner, Dr. Jennifer Klauman, was a previous guest on our show. If you haven't heard that episode yet, I highly recommend going back to listen to her insights as well, as they provide a wonderful complement to today's conversation. So whether you're studying for boards, navigating a career transition, or simply looking for ways to perform better under pressure, this episode offers valuable tools from someone who understands both the athlete's and the veterinarian's mind. Let's get to the conversation with Ryan Smith. I'm curious about when you look back on your younger self, are there any things like that you can share that kind of maybe contribute to who you started to become and maybe some interest that you were starting to develop?
Yeah, I can say I absolutely had no idea I was going to be anywhere near vet med. I did grow up in the horse business, so we had 25 horses. So there was veterinarians on the farm all the time doing stuff, and of course we, as your typical horse owners, you do most of the work yourself, and then it's only when you really have things that are above your head that you have to go to the veterinarian, because you try to kind of watch the budget on those kinds of things, because horses are not cheap to keep. Well, and when you have as many as we did, that's one of the things. So I really never was oh my gosh, I want to be in veterinary medicine. It really just came when my partner, Dr. Jennifer Klauman, and I had a conversation on the way back from AVMA headquarters about what is her career going to look like? What am I doing? I'm looking at some career changes. And she basically said, why don't we take what you do and apply it to my profession? And that's how I entered into the veterinary world, right? I call myself an inside outsider, because I'm an outsider because I'm not a veterinarian, but I'm an insider because I'm so connected and see so much that I get a different perspective on it.
And which is another reason why I'm very excited to have you on, so you can share that unique perspective, because sometimes you need one step back to be able to see the whole situation. So I know that when you were going through college and starting to develop your own career, you were starting to get into exercise and human performance. How did you kind of discover that that was something you were interested in and wanted to potentially make a career out of it when you were getting into college?
Yeah. So again, not one of those things I ever grew up. I was not a big sports person growing up. And so I actually started undergraduate in computer science and was looking at computer science and maybe engineering. And then I took this class. Actually, the kind of impetus was I lost 3 grandparents to 3 different types of cancers in 6.5 months when I was in my sophomore into junior year of college. And it really devastated me emotionally from that. It's almost dropped out of college, almost a lot of things that went there. And then I took a weight training class, which the instructor was, she was amazing as far as the weight training class. And then that led into me switching careers or switching majors into exercise science with a minor in business and starting to work at a health club and doing all kinds of things. And that led into 30 plus years of coaching along the way. So I typically don't follow your traditional path of what most people do.
That's fine. I have many of those on this podcast too. And I think it's already starting to show that the people that we are around can make a big impact on our direction and how we see things. So that's kind of neat that you not all, well, it's not neat that you had that terrible
Oh,
life experience, but that, your teachers around you who are really
mhm.
good teachers highlighted different possibilities for you that kind of pulled out some of the things that you were passionate about and moving forward with that. And so I also know that while you were working into exercise and human performance and personal training, you also got an interest in finance there a little bit. So it sounds like you were getting lots of different interests.
Right.
So how did finance kind of come in and you have a little stop off there and then get back on to more of the exercise and human performance?
Another one of those weird journeys. So I grew up with entrepreneurial parents. So they were teachers and then they left teaching and opened their own business and they owned a art gallery and custom framing for years. So I was like always around entrepreneurial and other business owners. And then, of course, there was the time in the kind of that mid to late 90s when Robert Kiyosaki and Rich Dad Poor Dad and all of those great entrepreneurial books were out there and had read that. And one of the things that I realized reading that was that I had no idea how the flow of money works or how building for retirement, savings plans, finances, business works, all of those kinds of things. No idea how the markets work. So I said, all right, well, I was married with a child that was at like freshly born at the time. And I'm like, I have no idea how to plan for what's coming. So the easiest thing to do was then I'm going to work in the market. So in 2000, I went and became a stockbroker. I was a licensed stockbroker for one of the bigger companies, and I learned about trading stocks, learned about options, became a registered options principal, did money movement, and did all kinds of things. Did money movement behind the scenes for mutual funds and some different things. So I did a lot of really, really cool stuff. Ended up being working with really high net worth individuals at a local branch office and did cool things. So, which then said, okay, I've learned this, and now it's time to go back to what I do and apply what I've learned versus I'm not staying here for the rest of my life.
I admit that I had one of those moments too after getting married and sitting. I was on my back porch. I still remember the moment and just like all of this like life hit me and I realized I guess I better learn these things and
Mhm.
and not just pretend like it doesn't exist. So
Well,
I did not become a stockbroker, but I did lean in a little bit and learn a little bit more so it wasn't quite as scary
right.
as it had been before. And so you said you were working with high net worth people,
Mhm.
and so is that kind of how you combined some of the personal training with some of these like big people who wanted to do triathlons and stuff like that?
It was. So I, as from that human performance standpoint and looking at how do I train people? How do you train people more efficiently, right? Because it's like, how do you make things more effective and more efficient? And taking those people and like, well, if I'm going to be like most personal trainers deal with people that are like on an hourly basis, they're in a club doing things like that. Like, well, it's not my jam. Like, I know these people and I have a relationship with them. So how do we take that and build it into, obviously, if I want to work with somebody as a trainer, and a coach, I want somebody who can afford to pay me what I want to earn, right? So that's where you start looking for the market of the people, and that's one kind of led me into that. So yeah, I started looking at them, going, okay, what do they want to do? Many of them wanted to train to do Ironman. They wanted to run the Boston Marathon. They wanted to qualify and run it. What did they want to do? And they were the ones that could afford to pay me what I want to make on a hourly slash contractual basis. Most of them have already very, very busy lives. And, if they're going to add another 20 or 30 hours of training for an Ironman and they don't want to get divorced and they don't want to like lose their family. And they're like, well, how do I do what would be 30 hours of training? How do we do it in 6 or 7 hours? What can we do efficiently from that standpoint?
It seems like efficiency has been a buzzword in the veterinary industry for a while too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've kind of teased that you're eventually getting to the veterinary industry. And I'm curious, do you see any similarities to executives,
Mm-hmm.
people that only have this amount of time, maybe
Right.
with some of the stereotypes that you're
Mhm.
seeing
Right.
on the veterinary side.
I think you've already hit on a lot of it there. Yes, right. Because it's to become a veterinary, right? You typically have to be a driven person, right? Because it's not the easiest industry to get into. It's not the easiest thing to get into vet school, to make it through vet school, to go on and lead a great career as a veterinarian. And again, don't want to just put this on veterinarians. I think it applies to anybody in the veterinary profession. But again, to go through the process to become a doctor is not a light decision to be made. So you have a busy life, things are going on, you've got a lot going on. You take your career on many times as your identity. And what do I do from there? How do I take care of myself? And I've also found that many times people that are really good at what they do, whether it be a veterinarian or executive, they also go, well, if I'm smart enough to do this, then I'm also smart enough to do that. And when they do that, then they realize that they don't have the education, they don't have the systems in place to do this other thing, even though they were experts at one thing. So they need somebody to come in and do that. So that was kind of my foray into the veterinary world, was seeing how much veterinarians actually looked like many of the athletes that I coached.
Yeah. Actually, we did an episode with Dr. Jen Kwame, your wife, and one of the things that I saw someone comment about was that they really related to that analogy of the endurance athlete when it came to being in the veterinary industry. So I thought that was good to kind of bring back out again. And I'm curious, you were mentioning that you had a child when you were looking at the financial things too. When did you meet Jen? Was she done with vet school before, during? Like how did that align?
Yeah, that it was actually years after that. So this was like my son was born in 99. I entered the
Okay.
financial world in 2000. Jen and I met in 2013. So I was
Oh,
divorced, and um it kind of led into, she was working out at a gym that I did some training for, and she took a running clinic class that I had, and that was just that kind of built a friendship. Really, the if you know Jen, this funny story that she will debate but then agree with is, I was at the gym one day taking care of it for my friend, and she walked in. She says, "Who are you, and what are you doing in my gym?"
oh,
And right, and that was my first introduction to her, because she's not one to be timid about introducing herself to people. And that kind of first developed into a friendship, and then ultimately developed into a relationship down the road. So, yeah. And then it led into, hey, why don't we do what you do and apply it to my profession? And that was in 2014 when veterinary coaching was born.
okay. So you had kind of a quick deep dive into veterinary medicine at
Yeah.
that point. Okay. So yes, also because this is going to be part of our conversation too, is not only were you helping people train in a physical capacity,
Mhm.
right? These are pretty intense things, especially if you're trying to be quite efficient in that work. But you also started getting interested in more of the like the mental health aspect of things
Right.
too, or maybe not necessarily just mental health, but like the mentation
Right.
of this
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. That
So
mental performance. Yeah.
yes. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how you had to make that click too?
Sure. So taking that transition of working with people that were busy, and things are like, oh, I see people doing 30 hours a week of training, and it's like, how do we make it more efficient? And then kind of working through the mental aspect of shifting, of going, I don't have to train for 30 hours a week. There are ways of doing this in 6, 8, 10 hours a week. That was a shift. But then dealing with people from injury standpoint, and coming back from injuries. When people are training a lot, they kind of move into it. A lot of times there's obviously injuries that are involved. And then for myself, I was in the midst of training for an Ironman, had it was a super easy inguinal hernia repair in the middle of training. And with that had obviously antibiotics, and antibiotics killed off my gut biome, which led into chronic pain and all kinds of things. Like, physically, I was there, but I was dealing with pain from the aftermath of the surgery, which then trying to come back and like go, okay, well, how do I overcome this? And Or if I can't, how do I shift my own perspective and what do I do from that? And just until even recently, like I hadn't been able to run for 11 or 12 years. It was painful to run. And it's like I'm starting to build back into that now. And just, again, just very short runs doing things. So dealing with that chronic pain for a long time was kind of, how do I shift it? How do I overcome it? How do I like figure out what I want to do? So that led into NLP, which is neuro linguistic programming, which goes back to the 70s by Drs. Bandler and Grindler, and then led into hypnosis and then led into all other kinds of aspects. I'm actually a certified hypnotist as well. So there's like all kinds of things that dealt with from the aspect of the mental performance. And how, again, how do you, I don't want to call it hack that because that's such a buzzword anymore, but like, how do I shift things? How do I learn and really change it and make it a permanent shift in my psyche?
There's a lot to be said of the way that we choose to perceive something.
Mhm.
And I remember you told me that story too when I asked if you've ever had a personal story where you also had to kind of struggle with a unexpected change that maybe impacted even your personal identity. And that was the story you shared. Because the other thing about a lot of people in veterinary medicine, I will raise my hand to this, is that we try to plan things out. And so again, we get on this, I go to college, I do this to get into vet school,
Mhm.
and then I'm going to do this. And so there's like this very long path because of how long the schooling takes. And when something comes up that was not in our plan, that can impact us greatly because we've been so set on this is who I am, this is what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
And when we got on our first call, the stat that you said that now that you are working with the veterinary professionals, that 80% of your coaching is now new graduates who have not passed the NAVLE. And again,
Mhm.
it's that unexpected thing that was not part of the plan. I was supposed to pass so I can keep going forward. I'll take us one step back because that's where we're going.
Okay.
But when you said you were in the car, that had personally happened to you, right? Like you
Mhm.
were something unexpected happened. You
Mhm.
were trying to understand what's next for me, like where do I want to go? And you're on a long car ride coming back from an AVMA conference or convention, and you and Jen are talking about both of you are probably, or I think we're kind of wondering what is kind of the next thing for
Mhm.
us. And what was that conversation like? And what was going through your mind when you started thinking about, can I do this with veterinary professionals?
Right. Yeah, that was an interesting because it was Jen's first meeting on the Council of Veterinary Services at AVMA headquarters up in Schaumburg. So we were up there. You know, she was meeting the new members of the council and doing all of the, like the networking things. And I got to go to the dinners and, meet like AVMA staffers. And then we were on the way back and she was at a point, she was medical director of a clinic and that she had been the technician at beforehand. And so she had come out of school and quickly moved into the medical director. Again, you're now as a medical director, here you are with the owners, you're telling the owners how to do charts and all kinds of things like that, right? And then she's like, but I don't know what I want to do. What's my next step? Am I going to do sports medicine? Am I looking at, an East meets West philosophy? I don't know what I'm going to do. And I'm like, well, I'm still dealing with this injury. And I'm like, I don't, again, this executive coaching thing works. And do I take it more the mental thing? She's like, well, that was the thing, was like, why don't we take what you do and apply it to my profession? Because we really need it. And this was really before the whole wellness thing came up in veterinary medicine, right? This was before AVMA was doing a lot. This was before everybody was talking. So we started doing some talks at AVMA conferences on wellness and what does the mental performance look like and things like that, which then obviously a lot of people were dealing more with the depression and the suicide. And we're like, no, how do we, instead of talking about that, how do we talk about it? How do we get better? How do we become, right? If we move the entire industry forward, the people that are struggling will also move with it versus if we're only focused on the one, right? That's the only thing that we can see. Whereas if we can go like, no, everybody moves, everybody gets better. And that was where we kind of started speaking and doing a lot of those things. And then ultimately transitioned into more of the coaching aspect of it. So the initial was speaking and talking and doing how do we help everybody and doing some one-on-one stuff. Now it's almost all one-on-one and small group coaching.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing that back up because I think that's an important point is that when you started this was not like where you have well-being talks all the time. We have whole tracks now at conferences. This was before where, I mean, people still remember when it was a little more taboo to talk
Well,
about some of these things. Again, you just kind of keep your head down and keep pushing forward. Suck it up, buttercup kind of thing.
mhm.
So as you were starting to have these conversations, you talked a little bit about it, but how was it received and how have you watched this change?
Mhm.
And any comments on maybe that change and maybe potential ways? Again, I think you were kind of hinting at it a little bit because unfortunately, I think it still kind of got stuck on the focusing on the negative. But what were you seeing?
Right. So, yeah, so the early days of the whole well-being and wellness and, veterinarians struggling, I think the biggest challenge there was I saw, as we alluded to earlier, I'm smart enough to be a veterinarian, so I'm smart enough to do the other things. And I saw the entire industry from AVMA to all the other organizations that were there that were going, well, we're going to solve our own problem ourselves. So instead of like thinking and looking at bringing in, how do you bring in mental health professionals? These are again, the early days. Now we do have mental health professionals that are in there, but we weren't seeing a lot of them. How do I bring in wellness people that can actually help with the mental aspect of it? And again, nutrition and exercise and stress management and all of those portions of it. It was, no, we're going to solve this ourselves. And as that inside outsider, I'm standing over here like, no, there are people that know how to do this to really help you move forward. And they're like, no, we've got this. And I think that's why it struggled at the beginning. Then they're trying to find their footing of how do we now find a way to move this forward. So I think ultimately they've kind of landed in a better place. Obviously things are not great yet, but I think they're in a better place. And I still think there's some work to do, but I've resigned to the fact that that's not my place. I have enough people and enough things that are going on within the industry and within our people and enough people that request our help that I can help those people and I can't steer the Titanic, right? Because the Titanic is not floating anymore. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's a great analogy. Maybe that's not the best one to
No.
have.
No, but Dr. Jen is gonna go and work on the Titanic aspect of
Yes.
things.
Yes.
No, but it's a good point, right? Because there's so many elements of that. There's this broader systemic professional level of things, and there's also the individual human being. And I definitely do not want the individual human being to get lost in all of it,
Mhm.
because even though we can talk about broad categories and trends and things, nobody has the exact same story. Just like some people pass the NAVLE and some people don't the first time, but then the person who did is going to have another challenge later on, right?
Mhm.
We all have our challenges. They're different. And I
Mhm.
think that level of individual care is also really important as well. So we can't always assume that if we go to one conference talk about well-being, we're good to go
Mhm.
because it may not fully address your personal level of where you need to be. So I think we need people kind of on all sides of things to kind of move things
Oh,
in the right direction. So when you were first getting those one-on-one conversations, how are people finding you? What was kind of the focus then? And then how have you now come to the statistic that I brought up around, specifically not passing a very important test to get
mhm.
through the
Right.
veterinary process?
Yeah. So the initial like business development was we were again speaking a lot. So we were speaking at conferences, and so we would speak at the Veterinary Leadership Conference at AVMA, other conferences, states, doing a lot of different things. Also speaking with SAVMA. We were on the SAVMA speaking bureau. So also for VBMA. So we had like a lot of things that we were really speaking. So that early days, we were actually talking more to students and instructors. So we had a lot of the schools that would bring us in to speak versus just being at conferences. And then that led into, obviously leads into people, right? If you've got 100 people in a room, there might be one or two people that are interested, right? So then they contact you and you kind of lead into that whole thing. And how do we personalize what your growth plan looks like? And that was the initial. Then it kind of moved into, we had somebody come to us and say, struggling with NAVLE, I've taken it a few times, don't know what's going on. I'm smart enough. I did well in school. Like, why can't I pass this test? And that one person led to 2, led to 5, led to 10. And here we are, really probably 9 years later on the NAVLE aspect of it. And again, it's not all been like huge groups. It started out as a 1 or 2 kind of thing, but now we run 2 cohorts, and starting next year, 3 cohorts a year of NAVLE coaching, which is somewhere usually around 20 people. And that's only because I just don't have the capacity for more. We usually get 40 or 50 people each cohort that are looking for help. And, we just unfortunately just can't take everybody. We just don't have the capacity for it.
Yes. And I remember I had to ask you if all of a sudden you had to go deep dive and figure out all these veterinary facts. So you are if you were the one training the veterinary facts and you said, no, thank you, I gave that over to someone else.
Yeah, so it originally started with Jen was doing the veterinary information part of the coaching, and it was me doing the kind of the overcome the stigma of not passing. Let's call it a trauma of not passing. It may not be the clinical term of a trauma, but it is a trauma when you don't pass. So like I was coaching the mental aspect. She was coaching the content aspect. And then as things progressed and Jen got vice president and she's traveling a lot and doing all those things, we had to find a different way to be able to coach the content. So we ended up bringing on and saying, all right, we need, from a group perspective, we needed a veterinarian who's an equine. We've got a great one who's a friend who she's an equine veterinarian, but she's also a therio. We have a bovine veterinarian. He was a former assistant state vet. We've got a porcine veterinarian. We have 2 small animal veterinarians that have also done ER stuff. Jen's one of them. We have a neurologist that's as well. So that we can provide that content. And really their job is to answer questions, help you to get from, I think this is the answer, but they say this is the answer. How do I get to that answer? I don't understand, right? So that's really the job. And we run those calls from a group standpoint. And then on top of that, then it's up to me to coach each person individually through their own steps to get to the NAVLE.
And based off some of the things you were telling me, it makes sense that a lot of what the challenge may be is not that it's the veterinary information. It's probably more on the other side of things. And actually, I think I was just listening to a podcast and they were talking about how the pass rate of the European test was also going down too. And they were saying like there's, of all of these questions, there's a decent amount on some obscure species. And it's like, how many veterinarians are really going to work on that species? And is that really the best indication that they can practice? Right. So there's probably some opportunities to look at some of those things. But do you mind? Because I'm going to get it wrong. You were sharing with me like the pass rate the first time around, and then looking at the pass rate like second time around. Right. And it is not what you would think it would be. So can you share that?
Right. So there's what's first called the criterion group. And the criterion of NAVLE test takers is first time takers with no accommodations. So just you've got the normal 6 blocks, 60 questions, 1 day. That's your normal. That's considered the criterion. And it's the first time you've taken it. So the pass rate on that has dropped over the last, even looking back to 2017, I've got some stats that show on that, but it's kind of dropped a little bit. It used to be in that kind of mid 90s percentage, and is now in the mid 80s percentage on the first time. So we've dropped 10 percentage points on that. there's a lot of things, right? We've had COVID and we've had some things, but we've seen that drop. But then as soon as you move into what's called the non-criterion are people that are either retaking the exam or retaking the exam with an accommodation, or are a first-time taker with an accommodation. So that's kind of the three groups that are in there. But the vast majority of those are people that are retaking the exam. And obviously there's a lot less people that are doing that than taking the exam the first time. But that pass rate has dramatically dropped over the years. And you would expect that, well, if I've seen this exam before, my pass rate's going to be higher because I know what to expect. I've seen the exam and I can go through it. But that pass rate has actually dropped to like around the 50% mark. So like 45 to 50% of those people fail this on number 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So it's, how do we overcome that trauma? That's the big one. So we only work with people that are retaking the NAVLE. We don't work with any first time takers. That would just be too much volume. And the psychology of retaking the test is different than your first time taking it.
And you pointed out too that because these are often very high achievers who are getting into that school,
Mm-hmm.
that not passing the NAVLE could be really the first major failure in their life. And that's where you were talking about this can be treated like a trauma. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how you feel. I've heard people talk about big T trauma and little T trauma. I don't know
Right.
all that, but
Right.
trauma is trauma.
Right.
And it should be taken with care. So,
Mm-hmm.
is that a big part of it? Where we were also talking about the high achievers, the athletes, where it is, yes, there's some more physical, like understanding course material, but then there's
Mm-hmm.
also that understanding yourself and what's going on inside of the head aspect of things.
Yes, very much so. I think, right, veterinarians understand animals, but they don't understand the human animal, because that's all we are, is we're a human animal or a two-legged animal, right? But we suffer from many of the same things from a stress slash threat perspective that we see in animals, right? So if you have a puppy that's in the exam room and it's, backing up and it's growling and it's worried, the same thing with the kitten, right? And we see that threat response in an animal. What we don't realize is that we many times have that same threat response. When we talk about test anxiety, when we talk about anxiety in general, anxiety is nothing but a threat response, right? It's many times a threat response about something that may or may not come true and probably won't. Yeah, we're not talking clinical anxiety that's there, but we're talking about anxiety in general. And if it's a threat response, that means that the body is doing threat response things. What is that? Oh, my gut shuts down. Okay, if my gut shuts down, that's where 70% of my neurotransmitters are made and housed, right? So if my gut shuts down, I don't have those quote unquote gut feelings that I know how to answer those exam questions. Oh, what else happens? My heart rate goes up, my respiration rate goes up, right? My mucosal system goes offline. My prefrontal cortex, the thing that makes me uniquely a doctor, goes offline. I can't think like a doctor if I'm under threat response, because my amygdala and my brainstem have hijacked my brain. So you can be super smart, and as soon as you get into that threat response, trauma response, anxiety, whatever you want to call it, your gut shuts down, your prefrontal cortex shuts down, which means that you don't have access to the information to be a doctor that you need to be on the test.
Well, this starts even making me think of, even for the people who pass the NAVLE and get into practice the
Mhm.
first little bit,
Mhm.
that is extremely anxiety inducing. And and so I'm guessing some of those come into play too, when you are
Right.
nervous about something and you feel out of place. And if you
Mhm.
aren't talking to yourself and kind of getting in the best mindset,
Mhm.
all of that training, which is in the noggin, doesn't necessarily
Right.
it's not being allowed to come to the surface
Right.
because of that response, the
Exactly.
natural survival response.
Exactly. Right. And as a human, if I am in threat response and I go into an exam room or I go into a stall with a horse and that horse is calm and I'm jacked up, unstressed out, that animal picks up on that. We have the data, we have heart rate variability data that shows how the nervous system in an animal will change based upon what's going on in the nervous system of the human. And actually, so if you walk into that room and the animal's calm, you can absolutely make that animal threat response, right? You can make them anxious by just walking in the room because you are. But in
Oh,
counterpart, if you know how to control that, you know how to manage that threat response, you can have an animal that's in threat response and you can bring them out of it because you know how to manage what's going on in your nervous system. So a lot of these people that we work with from the NAVLE, they get to carry these tools through their entire career.
well, is there any other tip that you like to share maybe when you do speaking engagements? So maybe something a little more broad that could be a tool or a resource that maybe people could use?
Yeah. So one of my favorites is actually a breathing pattern. So, we talk a lot about there's people that do yoga breathing, and you'll hear a lot of times people talk about box breathing, which is the inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for
Yep.
4, hold the exhale, right? So, which is it comes actually out of the military using that with military snipers. That's where that comes from. So, right, people that are in a very high tense scenario. But when we understand again human threat, so here's a weird thing. So when I inhale, my heart rate actually goes up, right? Just for that moment, just when I inhale. Why? Because I fill these two things that I call balloons that are called lungs, right? And I fill them, which means that my heart has less space to contract. So when I inhale, I fill that gap, heart rate goes up for a moment. So thereby when I exhale, right, my heart rate can go back down. Well, knowing these two facts, if I were to inhale for 4 and I would exhale for 8, right? Where is my heart rate trend going to go? Is it going to go up or is it going to go down? It's going to go down because I exhaled longer because I've created more space, right? And then if I repeated that again, I'm going to take the trend down more, which means that interrupts the entire cycle of heart rate going up, respiration rate going up, gut shutting down, all of those things. So it's real. We call it a 4-1-7, which is inhale for 4, hold it for 1, exhale for 7. And if I can repeat that 2 times, I've interrupted the whole threat/stress cycle.
That's interesting because I didn't know about the 4-1-7, like all of that, but I do that sometimes where I just do this very long exhale.
Mhm.
And I don't know if anybody else, you feel really good after you do it
Right.
because it also kind of releases some of
Mhm.
that built up tension too, I think.
Exactly.
So not only the
Shoulders
heart rate,
soft,
but
muscles
yeah,
relax.
it's just like
Yeah.
the whole body is just kind of like
Right.
goes into it.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that is a very good one and you can do it anywhere, anytime. You don't have to make it a nice, a dramatic, exhale
Yeah.
like sometimes I do for fun, but but it could be internal, so no one's seeing
Mhm.
you do that. Yeah.
I love things that can be done anywhere, anytime, and nobody even knows that you're doing it, right? Because there's things that we do, right? I'm not going to go sit in the corner in the lotus position, practice my breathing, right? In when you're at the clinic, you're not going to, that's not something you're going to teach people to do. But if I can just look up, take that in, right? Because we're triggering the vagus nerve, we're triggering the diaphragm, we're doing all that. We're literally shutting down and interrupting the threat response, which means that I'm just a calmer person. All of my muscles are going to release. All of the threat response goes away.
Yes. And again, not this can be taken in so many different ways. And I know that one of the other big categories that you have started to focus on when it comes
Mhm.
to certain points in a veterinary career, you call it the bookend. It's like the getting started, right? And then
Mhm.
also where someone might sell their practice. And that is also a big change. You would think it would be a good thing, right? Like
Mhm.
that's often what some people are working towards is making this
Mhm.
business and being able to sell it and potentially retire or go do whatever.
Mhm.
But when everything you have done has gone into being doctor or it's not just doctors who own practices, going into building
Mhm.
this business, this baby often, and then it's gone. Or actually you said it's not always that you sell and leave.
Mhm.
Sometimes you sell and then stay, which
Right.
means you now go from boss to employee, which can
Mhm.
also be very challenging. So do you
Mhm.
mind sharing a little bit about that kind of career transition and maybe taking some of these
Right.
skills and things to help with that.
Yeah, I think there's, again, with the corporate ownership that has really come around since early COVID, and it's again transitioning a little bit. But again, if you've built something and your entire team relied upon you, you were the boss, your family relied, like all of that, that not only was veterinarian, if you were the veterinarian, but you were that was part of your identity, right? So that practice was also part of your identity. And now we make the sale. So, right. So we generate a large, many times, either we get out of debt or we have a large surplus of income that automatically comes into us. And we don't know how many times how to manage that money. But then we go from being the boss to the employee that's a pseudo boss, right? Because the community at large many times assume that it's still owned by you, right? So, but things have changed behind the scenes, but you're still kind of the boss, maybe not, but who knows? And the staff doesn't know who's the boss, and all of those kinds. And it's really emotionally hard because now you went from being the owner, everything relies upon me, to now everything relies on corporate, but still it all falls to me. And I'm contracted here for 1, 2, 3, 5 years, whatever it might be. It's a really big mental change on how do I manage that? And again, if you're 65, 70 and you're doing this, and it was always old Doc Jones's clinic down the street or whatever it might have been, that's a big change. You're like, I'm looking for retirement, but now I can't retire because I have a contract with these people. Right. So, and it doesn't only mean that it's the older veterinarians that are retiring. It might be a 40-year-old that's selling their clinic, right? It might be a 50-year-old, but transitioning can be really hard. It's a really, really long way to get there. But
Oh, no, not at all. This podcast, we talk a lot about transitions because it's very natural in life. Things change, whether it's planned or not. You have a child, you get divorced, you move. These things they say are some of the most stressful things. Changing jobs, like all of these are extremely stressful. A lot of times they can be quite good, but still it's hard because it's a transition. And yeah, you're going from something that you had gotten into a habit and you had maybe even created an identity around something and then you have to change. So, what's the challenge of trying to do things yourself and then getting the community, the support that you need to also do it with others? If you understand my question.
one of our favorite quotes that we use a lot is, and if you've probably heard it, Jim Rohn, or like one of the business coach, motivators, is you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And then if we only look at who are the 5 people I spend the most time with, and if you're in a veterinary clinic, it's like, well, there might be another doctor, there might be a practice manager, but there's usually another team around me that is a group of people. It might be assistants, might be technicians. There's a lot of things. So when I look and I'm like, how do I grow, or how do I change, and how do I manage this when the 5 people that are the closest to me are people that I see every day that are also going to go through the same struggle. So that's one challenge to look at from the 5 people that I spend the most time with. So we look at it as, what are the 5 types of people that I spend the most time with? What is my family / maybe it's a business partner or something like that? What are those people? Those are the people that I'm typically going to be the closest and growth oriented to. What about my team? How do I know them? Do they know about me? Do they know where direction? What about my mentors? Do I have mentors that are there as well? So do I have somebody who helps keep me motivated, that's been the path before me? And then colleagues. Some people call it your tribe. People that are in the same boat as me, but may not be right here next to me, that I can share those struggles with because they go through the exact same struggle, right? I can't talk about it with my spouse, can't necessarily talk about it with my partner, but I need somebody who understands what I'm going through. And maybe they're on a journey too. So those are what we're going to call like my colleagues or my tribe many times, are really that main group of people. So like there's really kind of 5 areas of that you want. I only mentioned 4, but I'll kind of cut it there. But really you need to look at the types of people that you're with, and do they help grow you in the different areas?
Yeah. There is something to that having nobody likes the word balance, but this diversity of
Mhm,
groups of people, because you're right. Like I love to talk about how we as human beings, we are multidimensional. There's so much to us. We're not just a veterinarian or veterinary technician. Like
mhm,
we are parents, we're children, we are, maybe leaders in our community. Like there's so many different things that are part of us, and there's no one person that can understand every aspect of that. And so I have also really been proactive to try to find these communities, because there's a lot that my husband is just not going to understand. And as much as, we share as much as possible with each other, there's still a
mhm,
certain point where it's like, nope, there's just not the full support that you need. And so I call them masterminds, because I probably picked up the
mhm,
term somewhere among those books and podcasts. But yeah, I have, masterminds of other veterinary individuals who are
mhm,
also entrepreneurial. And so we
mhm,
have these very unique challenges, but then there's that theme of veterinary medicine that we all relate to. And then I have a mastermind of nobody is a veterinary professional. We're
mhm.
all entrepreneurs that are trying to do side businesses and things. They don't understand anything on the veterinary side, but man, they know SEO and all those fun things that I,
Mhm.
I also need help with. And,
Right.
and so I think it's helpful to also just know that a lot of times it takes intentionality to go and find these as well, because all relationships are two-sided. I love talking about it because one, I have seen it make such an impact and a difference when you have all of these support networks that can support you in all those different needs that pop up in your life. And it's not like all of a sudden, oh, I have this need, I'm going to go. No, you build these communities along the way so
Right.
that they grow with you.
Yep. Absolutely. I think if you're an entrepreneurial minded person, whether you are already an entrepreneur or not, right? Because there's many people that are entrepreneurial minded that don't yet have the opportunity to work as an entrepreneur, right? So it's a, I know I want to go there, but how do I find those people? So I think, right, there's that kind of thing that comes in where you, just because you're an employee doesn't mean that you're also not an entrepreneur. And how do I find those people? But finding those people outside of what you do on a daily basis. So whether it's, you attend a local business event, or you join, a group that's local to you, and you got to watch out for some of the networking events that kind of come, because they're right. It's, or is, right, I don't need to be just around a bunch of people that are trying to sell me something, right? That's there's, which is different than true networking. And growing as a person and going, okay, I need to find my group of people, my mastermind. How do I build that? And you can have, as you said, you can have multiple masterminds. I've got multiples and multiple mentors and multiple groups of people that help me to grow. I'm fortunate enough, Jen and I, we call each other more of success partners than anything else, because really we are both very growth minded, and we're really helping each other to do what we can to succeed.
Well, actually, that was going to be my question. So, when you think about your personal 5 categories,
Mhm.
you not necessarily have to call somebody out by name, but do you mind describing some of these individuals, and maybe even an example of how having that community really helped you personally?
Mhm. So, and it's morphed over the years. My parents, being entrepreneurs, was one of the people that they instilled that entrepreneurial spirit in me, and I grew a lot from that. Having gone through and been married and been divorced, but having somebody in my life who is also of a growth minded person, right? That can be really a big struggle for a lot of people. Is like, I feel like I've outgrown my relationship. And if you don't have somebody who's also growth minded, that can be a challenge for a lot of people. One of my masterminds came from reading a book. So there's Steve Sims is an author. He was a British bricklayer, and I actually went and we do these things that are called speakeasies, and we've got 40 people. You don't know who's attending, and you don't know who the speakers are. Basically, you go in and you trust that the things that you're going to be there are going to help you to learn, right? So that's what became one of my mentors, and I've attended several of these speakeasies, and some of the relationships I built from people that I'd never met, that I didn't even know before going in. we got there, and like, again, you connect with people, and sometimes they're close to you, sometimes they're all the way across the country. And those relationships to like go, man, I'm struggling today. And you know who you're going to text, you know who that person is that go like, to go, no, come on, pick it up. Let's go. Let's do this. And that's probably one of my, started out reading the book and reading the book like 3 or 4 times, and then going from there and entering the mastermind world.
Yeah. What was the name of the book? I'm sorry if I missed it.
It's called Blue Fishing, and Steve D.
Okay.
Sims. It's called The Art of Making Things Happen. And so he went from this guy being a bricklayer, coming and like going to another country and basically start creating these events for high net worth people, and then ended up creating experiences for high net worth people. And like, it's just one of those things, like it really hit me, and I'm like going, okay, and how do I create experiences? That was the thing that drove me with, how do I create an experience for each one of these people that are in our NAVLE versus like, here's your information, you need to go do this, right? How do I create the experience of how you retake the NAVLE that's different than any time you've ever taken it before? Or what does that look like as I'm transitioning my practice?
That sounds really interesting. I'm gonna have to look that one up. I haven't heard of that one. So, well, we've talked about a lot, but is there anything else that you want to leave? How did you say it? The insider, outsider, or outsider, insider?
Yeah, inside,
Any
outsider,
other?
yeah.
Yes, yes. Any other tips that you have, or what things you want to make sure that you mention?
I think probably one of the most profound things I heard a long time ago from a coaching perspective is like, if you think back to Tiger Woods in his heyday as a golf professional, he was great as a golf professional, but yet he had coaches, he had people on the outside, and they were not better at golf than he was. But what they could see was the things from the outside that he couldn't see because it was him, right? They were not better at golf, but they were better at seeing the things and helping him be a better golfer. We can talk about we can get into the whole like personality things that go with that too. But again, from, I can't see it and I need somebody else to be able to see it. And that's whether it's a coach or whether it's just having somebody that's, again, a mentor or another business professional, like go, here's what you're missing. And I think that's the key for most people, not trying to do it on your own. Nobody that's successful has ever done it on their own.
Completely agree. And the last question I always like to ask is, what is something that you are very grateful for right now?
I am grateful for so many things, but I'm grateful for my parents. Actually, today is my dad's 85th birthday, so super grateful for having time with him. Like, I'm actually, when we're done here, I'm going to go to the farm. They live about 7 miles away from here, and we'll go spend the day over there with them and doing some things on the farm. That, and just having people around that you love and say I love you and that mean it. Like, I have a 25-year-old son, and he still tells me all the time, I love you, Dad. Right. And in a time in their life when, even growing up as a teenager, that was not the words that you heard from them. I heard it from my son. So those close relationships are probably the thing that I'm the most grateful for.
I hope you enjoyed this fascinating veterinary story. We can make an impact in so many places. Check out the show notes for lots of resources. Please make sure you are subscribed on your podcast app, subscribe on the YouTube channel, and follow me on LinkedIn, where I hang out the most. You can contact me on LinkedIn, on the website at vetlifereimagined.com. And brand new is that you can text me. To send me a text message, find the link at the top of the show notes below that says, send us a text message. I want to thank our longtime sponsors, Fire Consulting and Will Hughes, who support the podcast over on our hosting platform, Buzzsprout. You can support the podcast too. Just check out the show notes for a link. And I hope to see you next time on Vet Life Reimagined.